These are hot button issues, meaning that they're more directly connected to a higher charge in your limbic system, subcortical brain, and that is what pulls us out. So it depends. For me, it can be hot button issues, or it can be the day. In other words, I find that it's more my state. At this point in my life, I get less triggered by things and more triggered by me. In other words, if I'm in a more dysregulated state, I can be more reactive to things than if I'm in a less regulated state. If I'm in a more regulated state, I'm less reactive than if I'm in a more dysregulated state. I tend to be more reactive, along with the dysregulation. I don't always know what comes first. But I think that, and this is where part of my interest lies, is, so what are the things that keep us from being and maintaining wakefulness and presence? It's not because people don't want to be, but I think we get seduced back into sleep, seduced by the ego's own clamor that this is important and this can't be so. I find for me, for example, when I'm the most reactive to people, it always interests me. I find myself feeling judgmental about something. And then at this point, I turn towards, okay, so what is it in them that's activating in you? Yeah. And so I start looking at, okay, well, what's my piece in this? Why do I? And I'll usually find that I'm being judgmental about someone doing something, right? That it's actually reflecting a piece of me that I'm judging, a piece of me that a part of me looks at as a fault or a liability or something wrong. I've made a judgment. I've made a discernment, and this, on a grander scale, comes from the operation of the ego, the need to preserve identity. And so it's the ego, it's the sense of identity that has a sense of right and wrong and good and bad that separates us from them and us from behaviors that we don't appreciate, and gets reactive to people who are flaunting, people who are being careless or selfish or narcissistic or annoying or stupid or whatever you want to say. But it ignites a kind of reactivity, and the reactive brain is not necessarily a brain in presence. You can be in presence if you're reactive, if you have strong enough presence. But most of the time, for most people, reactivity pulls us out of presence, or pulls us out of being conscious of presence.
Your poetry readings have helped so many of us find a sense of presence. It's so evident that you're a lover of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
When did you find that poetry was something that spoke deeply to you?
Later in life. Actually, it was more when I was taking the training with John Kabat-Zinn and Saki Santorelli. Mm-hmm. And during the intensive training to be a teacher, they did some readings of poems. One of the poems I read was Wild Geese. And John read it. And we had the windows open, and we were in Virginia, and the geese were going over. It was the fall. Mm-hmm. And it was this kind of epiphany that I had never seen poetry really be able to reflect the quality of consciousness before. And that started a search towards reading the ecstatic poets like Rumi and Hafiz and, other folks too. And I go in and out. I don't do a lot of reading because I haven't made time for it. Mm-hmm. So what's actually kind of good about the poetry in the morning is that every night I select something I'm going to read the next morning, and it gives me a chance to visit and to select and to go over things in terms of other people's writings, which just always opens me to something. No matter how many times I've read it aloud to myself or others, I almost always get different nuances out of something, or get a deeper sense of the same nuance, but just at a deeper level of taking it in.
Sure.
And I feel that poetry offers an access that straight prose and words don't evoke the same way. At least I'm not skilled enough to do it that way.
You think it's the rhythm?
I think it's part of the rhythm. I think it's partly the use of imagery. I think good poetry is very close to being subjective. It's giving you a transmission of the state. It's not talking about just thought. It's actually trying to transmit a qualitative experience, to taste something. And I think that poetry, art in general and poetry, are much more able to do that, at least in my mind, than some straight writing. That poetry invites someone into a side door, versus you could talk about consciousness and presence, and you could do all that, but it would be more of a discourse. It could be so very interesting and helpful, but it may not be as small and as pithy and as evocative as a good poem is.